terms of this whole interface or my involvement in Buddhist theory and practice, and eventually in the interface between Buddhism specifically and more broadly contemplative inquiry and scientific inquiry into the nature of the mind and its role of nature. This goes back about 45 years, to the age of 20, when I started studying Tibetan language in order to study Tibetan Buddhism. And so I spent about 14 years as a Buddhist monk, immersed myself in Tibetan culture, went to India, lived there for many years. In 1984, still as a monk, I decided to return to Western academia, studied physics at Amherst College, went into 2 years of retreat, and then spent 6 years in doctoral studies at Stanford, in religious studies, but very eclectic, doing a work in psychology, history and philosophy of physics, and so on. Spent 4 years teaching at the University of California, Santa Barbara, in the religious studies department, and for the last 12 years, I have been working with an institute that I founded, the Santa Barbara Institute for Consciousness Studies, and we've collaborated on a number of scientific research projects. We've invited many speakers to come in, and I've led quite a number of retreats and given lectures by way of this institute, which is based in Santa Barbara, but our wings spread in embracing the world, really. So a year ago we were in Scotland. This year we're in Australia. Next year we'll be in Spain and Italy. So we hold programs, long-term retreats and so forth, worldwide. And that pretty much brings us to the present moment. Well, first of all, Buddhism is about 4 or 5 times older than science. And old doesn't mean, it just is much longer, and it's been diversified over these last 2,500 years. Japanese Buddhism, Sri Lankan Buddhism, Mongolian, so it's very diverse. It's really like a living organism that is mutated according to different cultures and assimilated in different cultures. So there are themes that you can speak about from Buddhism where you can simply say, these are the Buddhist teachings, but there's a lot of variety as well. But to start with consciousness, I can give a definition that is very widely held, and I think one reason for that, it is radically empirical. And I, by my predisposition, my inclination, I am very much an empiricist, and so I've heard a number of definitions of consciousness. I think there are about 50 that are being bandied about these days. But the one I'm going to give you now, of course, I'm not suggesting it's the right one. When it comes to definition, the only question that comes to my mind is it useful or not? And so here's the definition of consciousness. It is a natural phenomenon, process, an event, an experience that is characterized by 2 distinctive features or qualities, and the first of these is cognizance. Cognizance. In fact, I'm going to invert that, because in fact it says in Tibetan, sel shing rikpa. The first one, selwa, means luminosity, but not as in bright, some radiant, bright light or something like that, but luminosity in the sense of it is consciousness that makes manifest all experiences and all appearances. So as I gaze at your face right now, clearly there are appearances. There's form, there's color and so forth, shading and all of that. There are no appearances from your side. That is, the molecules themselves have no appearances. Photons have no appearances. There are no appearances inside the brain. So often, even yesterday I heard a lecture in which the speaker, who was a neuroscientist, was saying, and here consciousness is here in the brain and here and here. There's no evidence for that at all, actually. It's just a way of speaking which is kind of unhinged from reality. Neurons don't illuminate anything, photons don't illuminate things, molecules that in your face or in your skin don't illuminate anything. It is consciousness that illuminates all manner of experiences during the waking state and also in the dream state for that matter. Also we're experiencing our emotions, our desires, our thoughts. It is consciousness that makes them manifest, right? So that's distinctive. Computers don't have that, robots don't have that, rocks, minerals don't have it. But there's more to consciousness than that. That's quite something. Because with no consciousness, there are no appearances. Nothing manifests, right? But it's more than that. As I gaze at your face, for example, like a mirror, there's a reflection, there's an appearance there. But there's more. I know that's your face. I know your name, I've heard it, and I know I'm looking at the face of a person. And so there's cognizance. It's a knowing, a cognizance, a being aware of. And that, again, computers don't have it. Neurons don't have it. I don't believe brains have it. It's just a manner of talking. But consciousness is knowing, and consciousness does illuminate. And those two qualities, to make manifest and to know, these are the two salient and radically empirical features of consciousness. So that's for consciousness. And you see, there's nothing really philosophical there. I mean, clearly there can be other definitions. There's no doubt about that. But I don't really see much that can be doubted in this one. Because anyone who's conscious knows that this is true. Appearances are arising, and I know the color of your hair. It's not simply a matter of belief or faith or intuition. I know it, because I'm looking right at it, right? Then we have mind. Now mind, there is a term, Sanskrit term, that is commonly translated as mind, and it's citta. But even in Buddhism, this one term, mind, has multiple meanings, as it does in English. Mind your head. I don't mind. These thoughts are occurring in my mind. I'm observing these thoughts with my mind. And so we see, just in those 4 sentences, the word is used in different ways. But one very useful way that is common in Buddhism is to use the term mind as an umbrella term. An umbrella term, which is to say it covers a wide range of mental processes. There's a space of the mind in which thoughts, images, appearances, dreams occur, the space of the mind, and then there are modes of perception, of memory, of reasoning, of imagination, of feelings, emotions, desires, and so forth. And so mind is that which has this wide array of mental processes, wide array of mental states, but we also say thoughts, images, dreams occur in the mind. And so in Buddhism, especially in one philosophical tradition, which is regarded quite widely as the pinnacle of Buddhist philosophical thought, it's called Prasangika Madhyamaka, middle way view. And that is, when it comes to words, the theme here is listen to yourself as you use the word mind. And of course, I know it's somewhat different in Italian, and it's different in Spanish, and it's definitely different in French and German, let alone Chinese, Mongolian, and so forth and so on. And so there's no notion in Buddhism that we have the right definition of mind. But rather, when we seek to understand mind, since the word mind doesn't define itself, words never define themselves, and moreover, we don't have vocabulary dictators, the vocabulary president or king or emperor that says, this is what mind really means. You will now all agree, or I will punish you. There's nothing like that. And so words mean what we say they mean. And so in English, all of these terms, mind your head, I don't mind, the thoughts occur in my mind is very fuzzy, my mind is clear, my mind is really depressed, I have a mind, all of these are valid usages. So if you want to know what mind means, look at how the word is being used already, and then try to synopsize the common and accepted usages of the term. And that tells us what we really mean by mind. But of course that evolves and it changes from language to language, from culture to culture. So it's amorphous. There are many. And so, for example, I look at your face, and Nick could ask, do you see Zaya? And I say, yes, I do. But then he said, well, do you see all of Zaya? No, my answer is nobody's ever seen all of Zaya. You've never seen your pancreas, I'll bet you. You've never seen your back. And so it's not necessary to see all of Zaya to say, yes, I've seen Zaya, I recognize Zaya. And the face is enough. But if you ask, is your face Zaya? Is that a person? Of course it's not. It's skin, it's bone, flesh, and so forth. So likewise with mind, when I sit quietly, as I'm doing right now, and I see thoughts coming up, images coming up, I'm observing my mind. Is that thought my mind? No more than your face is your body, or your face is you. But it's enough. As we speak, if I say, I can't see Zaya because all I see is her body, saying, well, that's just kind of, why are you talking that way? What more would you expect to see? Do you think you have to be clairvoyant in order to see Zaya? It's enough to see the body, a living body, one who's clearly responsive and so forth. And so to observe the mind, it has multiple dimensions to it. And that is, we can simply observe thoughts and images coming up. And as we develop our metacognitive abilities, our abilities to monitor, to observe, mental states, processes, images, memories, fantasies, but also desires and emotions coming up. Then we see the richness and the diversity of mental events that are arising, and to observe any one of them is to observe the mind, as in observing your face, I am observing you, even though the two are not equivalent. And so all of these constitute observing the mind. But then let's go a little bit further. And that is, anybody can do this. If they have, if they're not mentally impaired or have some serious brain damage, people can observe their thoughts. Some philosophers doubt it, but I think that's just because they don't know how, And so we can observe our thoughts and images. One really wonderful way to observe your mind is to become lucid in a dream. And in the dream, everything you're experiencing, everything you're witnessing is a manifestation of your mind. And so that's actually the optimal laboratory for observing the mind, because in a dream, everything you're experiencing consists of nothing other than formations of your mind. Because there's nothing material, nothing physical. There's something physical in your face. It's made of molecules, atoms, and so forth and so on. There's no question about that. But in a dream, if you appeared in my dream and I saw you just as you are right now, there would be no molecules there, right? Because you're just arising purely in the space of my mind. And in fact, there's no one there. Right now, we have an I-you relationship, You're attending from your side, I'm attending from mine. But in a dream, it appears like there are many people there. But they're all kind of the society of mind, to use Marvin Minsky's term. They're all facets of your own mind and taking on persona. It's very intriguing. And so you can observe your mind by observing dreams, observing events during the waking state. But then let's go deeper. There's a practice called settling the mind in its natural state. It's very commonly taught in Tibetan Buddhism, but you find it elsewhere as well. In Christianity, it's there. In Advaita Vedanta, it's there. Where you sit quietly and you let your awareness be still. So that's my symbol for the awareness being still, like an unflickering candle flame, right? And you simply sit quietly. And sitting quietly, you allow the light of your awareness, the flow of your awareness, to illuminate the space of the mind, thoughts, images arising. And if you do that for many hours a day, for hundreds or thousands of hours, then what does happen, because this is an experiment that's been run many, many times, over at least 1,000 years. It's an old experiment, older than any scientific experiment. And that is what happens is, if you're just sitting quietly in this non-reactive but very attentive and discerning fashion, you're not spacing out, you're not zoning out, you're not in a trance, attending just as I'm attending to you right now. But right now I'm speaking, but without speaking, without even the mind speaking, quietly observing the events arising. So let 5,000, 10,000 hours flow by. Doing that 5, 10, 15 hours a day. At least 10 or 12 would be good. What happens is your mind calms down. Like a snow globe that's all shaken up and the snow is flurrying all about. If you just set it down, then it settles and all of those little flakes come to settle on the bottom, and then what you're seeing is completely transparent, translucent. Yeah? So your mind becomes transparent, translucent. The mind is settled in its natural state, and that natural state is a deeper dimension of consciousness, called by many names in different traditions. I'm absolutely persuaded this has been discovered by contemplatives in multiple traditions. And your mind has gone dormant. Your mind, Zaya's mind, Nick's mind, my mind, with gender, with ethnicity, background, acculturation, all of that, it goes dormant. And what's left is simply a flow of luminosity and cognizance. And you've slipped into a deeper substrate, consciousness. And so now you're observing your mind, but it's no longer a human mind. It no longer has gender, ethnicity, and so forth. You're not old or young. It's simply like just clear water. But it's still individuated. And so if you, while resting in that flow of consciousness, a more subtle continuum of mental consciousness, you are completely free of a very malleable awareness or attention. And if you wish, you can direct your attention to the past, like a laser pointer. Direct your attention to the past and retrieve memories that perhaps you hadn't thought of for years or even decades. And you can keep on focusing and retrieving memories from earlier and earlier, right? From this very clear space, very clear space. It's almost like setting a telescope, like the Hubble telescope, up above the atmospheric distortions of our world. So, and when you turn it away from the planet, look in deep space, there's kind of nothing between you and the distant stars and galaxies. Nothing there between except just sheer empty space itself. But you want to get outside, beyond the atmospheric distortions, let alone the smog and dust and all of that. And so that takes you to a deeper dimension of mind. We call it subtle mind. Yes, there is. And it's still individuated. It's not God, it's not the soul, it's not anything utterly transcendent. But this is the dimension that I think there are very, very compelling reasons to believe. This is the dimension of consciousness that is not contingent upon the brain and does carry on from lifetime to lifetime. And that can be attested. That can be tested. So we can ask, well, this, and by the way, when you arrive at this by way of very deep meditation, by way of samadhi, it's not only luminous and cognizant, but it's also blissful. Great discovery. And it's been discovered again so many times and by people in different traditions. That it's not simply a Buddhist creed or a Hindu creed or a Christian. It's one of the things you discover if you know the methods for exploring the depths of the mind from the first person perspective. And so that's individuated. But it still has a sense of individuated ego or agency. And when you're tapping into memories, you're not tapping into other people's memories. You're tapping into your own memories. But those memories actually may precede the experiences of this life and go back even multiple lifetimes. But it's your previous lifetimes, not Nick's or anybody else's, right? So that's pretty fascinating in and of itself because it's empirical. This is not a creed or a doctrine or, you don't go to heaven if you believe it or anything like that. This is, check this out, come in with an open mind. But it's a lot of hard work. It means probably going off for a year, 2, 3 years, full-time work. But then we do this, people do that all the time. A 3-year postdoc in neuroscience is nothing to write home about. Like, you don't get a Nobel Prize for that. It's normal. What we don't have in our modern civilization is we have not created the facilities and given the support to train full-time professional contemplatives who are taking their research, their inquiry, as seriously and with the full dedication, sustained dedication, as do physicists and neuroscientists, and for that matter, medical doctors, right? But then we can ask, is there anything beyond this continuum of individuated, very subtle consciousness that is not brain contingent? And the answer is, yeah, that's just the drum roll. This is the preparation. Because once you're resting there, then you are very close to being able to cut through, to shatter this, how do you say, enclosed or this individuated, this discrete flow of consciousness that is your own, and break through that. Meister Eckhart, the great Christian mystic, spoke of this as Durchbruch. Durchbruch literally means breakthrough. The Tibetans call it tekchur, cutting through. Cutting through. Something that is kind of bound, individuated, locked into time and space. Locked into time and space. Your coarse mind clearly is, because the coarse mind, your ordinary mind, that's arising in dependence upon the brain. Damage the brain, and you don't see, you can't remember, your mind becomes foggy, and so forth and so on. And damage it more and more, and then after a while, the mind isn't there anymore. You've gone vegetative, right? And so this coarse mind, the mind that we identify with so strongly, that very clearly arises in dependence upon the brain, and neuroscientists are with great sophistication showing us literally hundreds of specific correlations between brain activity and subjective experience. But as Donald Hoffman commented this morning, they've actually made no progress whatsoever in understanding the nature of the correlations, what David Chalmers calls the hard problem. And so we need to linger, my belief is, we need to linger there in this very fertile unknowing, to recognize that and not forget that yes, the neuroscientists have done a great service in highlighting, elucidating specific types of correlation, local and global, of brain activity and subjective experience. But we do not know, scientifically, we do not know the nature of those correlations. And to pretend as if we do, and many, many people do, is actually to replace an illusion of knowledge for actual knowledge. And that's a great disservice to science, because you will not proceed further if you think you already have the answer. So we come back to this issue of Durchbruch, and this is something universal. You find it in the Sufi tradition, the Advaita Vedanta, the yoga tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Taoist tradition, and so on, of breaking through to a dimension of consciousness that truly is transcendent, that transcends all conceptual frameworks, transcends thought, transcends articulation, that is not within space and time, that is divine, and the ultimate source of well-being. And it's beyond one and many. It's neither someone else's, and nor is it yours. But in Tibetan Buddhism, they often say Rangirikpa, one's own pristine awareness. And that's another term for it. Primordial consciousness, pristine awareness, goes by many names. But they often do say one's own pristine awareness. Not that on this level it's individuated, that my pristine awareness, this deepest dimension, is actually located here and it's mine. Not that at all. It is to say, though, that go right into the present moment, into your own awareness, and cut through your ordinary psyche, the ordinary one that we watch all the time, or if we wish, and go to this deeper level, the substrate consciousness, and then go right into the arrow of it, right into the essence of that, break through it, and then you're into this open expanse, which is beyond any conceptual categorization, including mine or yours, one and many. But the point is, it's not someone else's. You're not being possessed by something or someone else. This is your ground of your own being. But the ground of your being, this ultimate ground, transcendent ground of your being, and the transcendent ground of mine being are non-dual. So this whole conference is on non-duality, which has many meanings, many legitimate meanings, very meaningful meanings. And I would say this, the deepest one, is that when I go to my ground, that ground is not different than yours or Maurizio's or Nick's, but for that matter, the ground of any sentient being. Not just human beings, but any sentient being. It is a ground that is truly transcendent. And realizing that is the meaning of life. Actually, the deep sleep, a state of stage 4 non-REM sleep, dreamless sleep, the parallel here is not with this pristine awareness, but it is exactly that same state of consciousness that you tap into when you go into deep samadhi, not ultimate, not transcendent, but it is that subtle continuum of consciousness that carries on from lifetime to lifetime. So in the classic text and it's not just because a bunch of philosophers or theologians thinking about this, the classic texts are by great contemplatives who are speaking from the experience, and then they collate. You know, they're intersubjectively validated truths. And I think this is an enormously important topic. And the strongest, for many scientists, they say, what? They don't really know what we're talking about at all. No, meditation is subjective. It's your own thing, man, and how could anybody know what you're experiencing and so forth? But that's because we're living in a contemplatively primitive society, unfortunately. We're very sophisticated in other ways. Contemplatively, Stone Age. Sorry. but it's true, you know. But we have a wonderful template for this, or an analogy, and that is what many people regard as the foundation of modern science, is mathematics. There is no physics without mathematics, you know. And so mathematics, do mathematicians, people like, you know, the great ones like Roger Penrose or Gauss or many others, have they actually made discoveries or only simply come up with cool ideas? And if you ask many of them, including the greatest, they will say uniformly, we are making discoveries. These are not just cool theories, cool ideas, ingenious ideas, brilliant ideas. No, we're making discoveries. And one person may make it first, and they do, you know. A great mathematician will make some breakthrough, make some discovery, and then write out the equations. But the person has already got it. I studied as far as advanced calculus when I was studying physics at Amherst College. I'm going to interrupt myself here just for a moment. And I asked my professor, who was a very good mathematician, I asked him, when does a proof take place? Because it was all proofs. We were just doing one proof after another. I said, when does a proof take place? And his answer was, when you get it. You know? So you can be reading through a proof. Part of my thesis at Amherst was 30 pages of mathematics, laying out and analyzing and determining the energy density of empty space. How much, when you take a volume of space, I'm rambling a little bit, but it's fun. When you take a volume of empty space, a thimble, a handful, whatever, and as a thought experiment, let's imagine you suck everything out of it. All the thermal energy, all the matter, photons and so forth, but then as a thought experiment, imagine you suck out all the gravitational energy. You can't do that, but as a thought experiment. So now I've got a handful of nothing. There's nothing in there besides just flat out empty space with no matter and no energy in it at all, as a thought experiment. Then we can ask, and it has been asked, is there any energy that is intrinsic to the very nature of space itself? Space energy. And the answer is clear. This is not a debated point. The answer is yes, and it's been demonstrated empirically, and it was demonstrated mathematically, and that's what I followed in the footsteps of the great ones, writing out 30 pages of mathematics to calculate the energy density of empty space. It's called the zero-point energy of the electromagnetic vacuum. And you can ask, what is the energy? How much energy is there in a cubic millimeter, for example? And if you do the straight equations without normalizing them, monkeying with them, tweaking them, the answer is quite interesting. Infinite. It's infinite. Infinite. That's what comes out at the end of 30 pages of equations. That's what the mathematics said, and the mathematics is clean. And so when I was an undergraduate studying physics, as a Buddhist monk, I was definitely an oddball. I was alerted to this whole topic of the zero-point energy of the vacuum by my mentor, a very, very fine physicist. And I said, I want to take that on. I want to understand that, you know. And so I had to do all the mathematics for it. And then the equations were laid out. Here's how we calculate the energy density, how much energy per cubic millimeter or what have you. And for a really outstanding mathematician, it's like 5 equations. But I'm not a really outstanding mathematician, and I couldn't read those 5 equations and understand that they'd actually had discovered something. It didn't prove anything to me. So then I worked on those 5 equations. And I worked on them, and I went back and forth with my professor, and I unpacked 5 equations into 30 pages of equations. 30 pages, with commentary, so that I was demonstrating to myself, I've understood every single step here. There's the mathematics, and here's the prose explanation. Here's the mathematics, prose explanation. Until finally, at the end of 30 pages, infinity sign. That's the energy density of empty space. So I knew it when I got there and said, yes, I've earned this. I'm not just a believer or simply having faith or taking it on somebody else's authority. I did the years of mathematics to be able to do that, and then I followed that particular mathematical line, and then I saw, there it is, and it's incredibly beautiful mathematics, and that is the conclusion. When I was at Amherst, I got so intrigued by the 4 equations of James Clerk Maxwell. In 4 equations, he laid out the equations to really understand electromagnetism throughout the universe. 4 equations. There's a T-shirt that lays these out and said, and God said, and there was light. You know, and so the same thing happened. These are incredibly elegant equations, but unless you've really had a lot of training, you won't understand them. So I asked one professor at Amherst, would you spend 14 weeks with me? I want to understand those equations, and I want to understand the beauty of them, because everybody's saying they're incredibly beautiful. I want to understand the aesthetics of these equations by James Clerk Maxwell, so that I get it. And 14 weeks later, I did. Now, I'm not even remotely a great mathematician. I just put in the hard work. But the point, this is all something of a tangent, but an interesting one, I think. And that is, if Nick, for example, were doing some cutting-edge research and made some great breakthrough, some nut that nobody had been able to crack for the last 300 years. And, you know, he's one of those incredible savants, and he breaks through. We hear from his room, Eureka! You know? And he runs in, and you're another mathematician. He said, Zaya, look, I've solved it. I've discovered. Here's the solution. And you're also of his caliber. You can say, that's a big claim. That's a big claim, Nick. I have to be very skeptical, but I will look at your equations. I'll follow your whole reasoning. And then 2 hours later, Eureka! We hear it from your room. That Nick, you nailed it. Incredible. And then imagine, hypothetically, I'm through Alan. I've just checked this out. Check it out for yourself. I think he's done impeccable work. He's made a great breakthrough here. And I read it, and 2 hours later, man, Zaya, fantastic. We have to nominate him for the field medal. You know? Well, the point here is that this is all subjective. When Nick made his breakthrough in Eureka, he's the only one. It's like having breakthrough to realizing the Godhead. I mean, it's not the same, of course, but you know it, and there's no way you can simply tell somebody and they will get it by telling them. They have to do the hard work. So if you were simply maybe very fond of him or trusted him a lot and he said, Zai, believe me, I've nailed it, well, you could say, well, you probably have. I know you're a very honest person, but you wouldn't get it. It's just faith, it's belief, confidence, trust, which are all very good qualities. But if you'd had the training and you follow it line by line by line, and then whoosh, that cut through, that breakthrough at the end, gosh, he did it. He did it. But this is how mathematics has been working for centuries. It's entirely subjective. And you'll never understand mathematics by studying the brain correlates of mathematicians, ever. In fact, it's a silly idea. The notion that we'll understand meditation by studying the brain correlates or behavior of meditators, it's cute. It's quaint, and you'll learn some superficial froth. But will you get it? No more than there's a shortcut to, having 15 years of training in mathematics. You have to do the work yourself. But the point I'm getting at here is this is common knowledge. I'm not making any kind of wild conjecture here. Mathematics is rock solid, but it's not objective. You can't simply write an equation on the board and prove anything to anybody. A parrot or a robot could be programmed to write something on the board. It doesn't prove anything at all. Computers don't prove anything. Robots don't prove anything. That's because they don't understand anything, right? But people with consciousness do, right? And so as we have intersubjective validation among highly trained mathematicians, and they know who to nominate and eventually whom to award the Fields Medal, which is kind of the Nobel Prize for mathematics. And yet outsiders will say, what did he prove? And the mathematician probably have to say, I don't think I can even talk about it to you. Unless you know mathematics, you won't even know what we're talking about, let alone the fact that we've actually discovered something. And so years ago I was with a team, it was 1992, with a team of crackerjack neuroscientists, really good, world class. And we went up to the mountains above Dharamsala. And we wanted to study attention, we wanted to study compassion, and the neuroscientists had brought state-of-the-art portable equipment with them. We hiked an hour and a half up in the mountains above Dharamsala, India. And I had lived up there as a monk. I knew some of the yogis up there, but I'd also had the scientific training and I was the interpreter. So I was a linguistic and cultural liaison between these scientists and these yogis. And and with the blessing and the authorization of the Dalai Lama, then we brought our backpacks full of equipment up there, EEG and computers and monitors and so forth and so on. And we spoke with a number of yogis, and some agreed to collaborate, some did not, all with very good reason. But one of them I remember in particular. He'd been up there for maybe 10, 15 years in solitary retreat, just devoting himself to meditation, probing the depths of the mind. And the scientist, with his permission, there was nothing improper at all, the scientist came to him, and I was interpreting for them, and they said, Yogi, we'd really like to understand the cultivation of attention. We're also very interested in compassion. Would you allow us to monitor your brain, to monitor your behavior, give you a questionnaire and so forth, because we'd really like to understand meditation? And the yogi gave an incredibly benevolent smile, almost like a mother towards her child. If you had a 5-year-old child, and you said, Mom, I'd really like to study quantum cosmology. Could you teach me? Or could I go to MIT now? Because I've heard it's really cool. And the child's 5 years old. You would give that smile. It's not sarcastic, it's not condescending, but it's not a realistic idea for a 5-year-old to study quantum cosmology at MIT. And so that was the smile. And he said, well, I'd be glad to help you understand meditation. Come and meditate. And then you'll understand meditation. But there's no hope they'll understand meditation by studying my brain or anybody else's brain. There's no hope. So that was an interesting kind of, we're developing a bouquet here, because I'm not very linear, as you can tell, in conversation. But I think if one stands back, maybe there's some method to my madness. But the theme that you raised, I do recall quite clearly, deep sleep. In the classic teachings, based upon an enormous amount of experience, that's why they're classic, is that we enter into this continuum of consciousness. I'll just call it the substrate consciousness. It goes by different names, of course. So we naturally enter into it every time we go into deep sleep. That's the substrate consciousness. If you faint, what's left over, when you passed out, substrate consciousness. When you receive general anesthesia, you're knocked out. You're not unconscious. You're not unconscious. This glass of water, this is unconscious, as in not consciousness, as in 0 degrees Kelvin of consciousness. There's nothing you can do to this glass of water to wake it up. There's nothing you can do to it, to make it conscious, for it to illuminate phenomena, to know anything. There's nothing you can do to it. No magic wand, nothing. It's just a glass of water. And I would say the same is true for the neurons inside your head. There's nothing you can do to wake them up. They're chemicals. There's an enormous amount of neuromythology that's going on. That the neurons know this, and consciousness is here, and emotions are here. And it's all in their imagination. Because it's a categorical error to say that images like the color yellow is in your visual cortex. That's a categorical error. The yellow, when you see a sunflower, as we heard just yesterday, or maybe it was this morning, one of the scientists said, well, that yellow, I remember the speaker was last night. The yellow that you see when you look at a sunflower, it's not in the molecules. There's no such thing as yellow molecules. And there's no such thing as yellow photons. They don't exist. And not a single neuron, synapse, or dendrite in your brain turns yellow when you see yellow. Yellow's not inside your brain. It's not in the photons, and it's not in the flower. And therefore, it's not in physical space. If it's not out there and it's not in here, it's not anywhere else, not off to your left or your right. It's not in physical space. And that's actually true of all of subjective experience. It's not in physical space for a very simple reason. It's not physical. It's like asking, where is justice? In the gavel? Or in the courtroom? Or in the penitentiary? Or in the gallows? Where exactly is justice? And you see, but that's a categorical error to ask the question. Because justice is not physical, therefore it's not located here or there. And that's true for consciousness, and it's true for all subjective experience. It's not physical, therefore to ask where is it located in physical space is like asking where is justice. It doesn't make any sense. And yet somehow it doesn't seem to be clear to a lot of people. So to answer back on target, I know we're going on a lot. Maybe I'll try to be brief. I'm going to wrap this up, and then I can give you bullet items if you like. But deep sleep, general anesthesia, comatose, fainting, and then the really interesting one. Oh, you achieve it in samadhi, and that's where you go in consciously. That is, you can actually go into that same dimension, but with your eyes open, not literally, but you go in cognizantly. Because when we normally fall asleep into ordinary non-lucid, deep, dreamless sleep, by the time we get there, we don't explicitly know anything, right? You don't even know you're asleep, and that should be the most obvious thing. But you're not simply not conscious like the glass of water is not conscious. Because number one, you can be awakened. Somebody can shake you, put smelling salts, shout at you, shine a bright light. But also it's more interesting than that. And that is mothers around the world. I've often commented on this. I always have the mothers nodding their heads in agreement. Mothers during the first 2 years of especially the first year after the birth of the baby, they generally tend to be sleep deprived because the baby has up all the time. And so we can easily imagine, I don't know, I'm not going to even ask, but you've just put the baby down, the baby is asleep, and you're just dead tired. And you put your head on the pillow, and 10 seconds later, you're out like a light, you've gone into deep dreamless sleep. And why you're deeply sleep, you're so sleep deprived, just deep dreamless sleep. Your husband's snoring away like a tractor, you don't wake up. A police car goes by, sirens wailing, you don't wake up. A fire engine goes by, you don't wake up. And then, wah, you wake up to a softer sound than the sound of the snoring and the fire engine and so on. And that's deep sleep. And it's true that you're not unconscious. Otherwise, number one, nobody could ever wake you up. But number two, there's no way you'd wake up for the baby, your baby, and not wake up by a louder sound. People also often, many, not all, many people are able to set an internal alarm clock. If they need to catch an airplane tomorrow at 5 o'clock in the morning, they can set the internal, I have to wake up at 3:30. I forgot my alarm, but I have to wake up at 3:30. Many people have that ability. So there's some implicit awareness of the passage of time and an implicit discerning intelligence that distinguishes between the sound of your baby and the sound of a fire engine. And one triggers, the other one doesn't. So the point there is that when you're in deep dreamless sleep, you're not unconscious. It's not divine consciousness. You're not touching God or going to your Buddha nature or anything transcendent, but you are tapping into a deeper continuum of consciousness. And so you can go there lucidly by way of samadhi. That takes usually hundreds or even thousands of hours of training. An easier way, that doesn't give you the full experience, but it does give you a sneak preview, is if you're gifted in or experienced in lucid dreaming, go into a lucid dream. So you're quite cognizant that you're dreaming, while you're dreaming, and then, in the midst of the dream, stop. Don't do anything. Don't engage, don't interact. Just, in a matter of seconds, the dream will vanish. Dream vanishes, just fades right out, if you don't interact with it. And if you maintain your lucidity, that knowing that this is a dream, and the dream vanishes, it's like a holodeck in Star Trek. The whole dreamscape vanishes, and you slip right into the substrate consciousness, and you slip in lucidly. And then you're just in this sheer vacuity, like the holodeck that's not turned on. The sheer vacuity of the space of your mind, empty of appearances, but your cognizance is there. You can be wide awake and cognizant, clearly aware of almost nothing, except that you are aware, and you've tapped into the substrate consciousness. Now, it's not with the full intensity, brilliance, acuity, as if you'd spent thousands of hours in samadhi, but you are tapping into the same one. Now, finally, there's one more phase of life in which we naturally slip into this substrate consciousness. And that's when you die. The final moment, as the brain is shutting down. Let's imagine you have a nice gradual death. You're just dying because your body's worn out. You're 80, 89 years old, and the body is just saying, I'm finished, it's done. And the whole thing's just shutting down gently. And the brain then, just shutting down. Your senses are imploding. Your cognitive abilities are disappearing. Emotions, memories, and all of that. Down. You're losing your mind, because the mind arises in dependence upon the brain, the coarse mind. But unlike the assumption, and that's all it is, of the materialists, when you lose your coarse mind, you don't lose everything, because they can't measure anything else. They can't even measure consciousness, so they're kind of in the dark, frankly. But when your coarse mind shuts down because the brain is no longer able to support it, then the brain doesn't simply go into nothing. It doesn't go back in neurons. It never came from in the first place. Your mind goes into a dormant state and slips right into the substrate consciousness. That carries all the configurations of your past experiences, memories, and so on. And when you come to the dead zone, the culmination of the dying process, then this is irreversible, because your brain now shut down. It's not going to turn back on again, unlike falling asleep or getting anesthesia and so on. But you're tapping into that substrate consciousness. That's the one. And you get it for free. Get it for free. Now, most people, when they are dying, they lose their awareness, just as if they're falling deep asleep. And the deeper they fall, the more veiled, clouded, obscured their consciousness becomes. So by the time they finally come to the substrate consciousness, there's kind of a blanket over it. It's obscured. And they're not even aware that they're deep asleep, and now you're not even aware you're dead, which is kind of a shame. Because life starts when it starts, and I won't pretend to know, but sometime at or after conception, and then it ends, clearly, at death. But the experience of being dead is the last page of the book, And so imagine you're reading a very interesting novel, the novel of your life, right? And you come to the last page, and you fall asleep. You're coming like, how did it end? And you pass out. That'd be a shame. You want to see the last page. What was it like to see this life come to its closure? And then what happens now? And what happens now, there's a lot of evidence. It's just the scientific community is not open to it yet, because they're always looking outward, the physical, the objective, quantifiable. which is all very well for the objective, physical, and quantifiable, but it's not so useful for understanding that which is not objective, not quantifiable, and not physical. And the notion that all of reality consists of that is, I think, frankly, hilarious. It's quite cute, but it's silly to think that all of reality consists of only what scientists can measure in the 21st century. I mean, who seriously can believe that? Got to be a real true believer, you know? And so, what happens then? Because actually there's evidence. It's there, it's really not hard to find. Is, as in meditation, you come to the substrate consciousness. And then if you have the skillful means, they're not complicated, but a way of, one can say, on the one hand, cutting through, but on the other way, this utter, existential, radical release. Release of identification with. So right now, you may be, or I'll speak for myself, I may very easily identify with being a man of this ethnicity, this age, this cultural background, personal history, and so forth. I may identify with my thoughts, my memories, my desires, my imaginations of my future, and that locks me into a very small place in space and time. I'm over here, I'm not over there, right? But not because I'm really over here, but because that's the tentacles of grasping and of identification are locking onto this and not locking onto that. But release that identification with, that grasping onto, the sense that this is I, this is mine. Just fearlessly release it. And then it dissolves, and your awareness slips into the substrate consciousness. But it's still individuated, and it's blissful, it's luminous, it's non-conceptual. And these are very alluring, there's the word, very alluring, enormously alluring. I mean, it's just like, I've never taken heroin and I have no interest, but pure heroin, I think it's extremely addictive. I have no interest in finding out myself, just actually not curious. But this is just pure bliss, with no mediator. No sex, no food, no this, no mediator at all. I'm happy by way of. That's what we normally do. But this is no by way of. You've gone into the mother lode. You've gone into the wellspring of bliss on this relative level. And you can imagine how you so easily just want to cling to that. The luminosity, the intensity, the brilliance of awareness itself, you're resting in it. It's like just being light. You can imagine how that could be alluring. And then the third quality is non-conceptuality, the serenity, the peace that surpasses understanding. So peaceful, so serene, so profoundly safe, so quiet. And you can imagine a certain temperament might think, you can have the bliss, you can have luminosity. I'm going for that serenity. That's what I value most. And so these tentacles of grasping can be intensely strong when you're resting in that substrate consciousness. And there's still an implicit, but very real, sense of I am, individuated, separate, autonomous, me, my bliss, my luminosity. So it's not so a matter of cutting through, like taking out some kind of a mental machete and trying to cut through that. But so releasing, now truly existential releasing of any type of identification with, grasping onto, even preference for the bliss, the luminosity, releasing entirely grasping. And then it's as if you go into free fall. It's just like falling out of a plane backwards. You're just going fearlessly, but with no ground to hit, no impact, just, and that's when you break through. And so that can happen in meditation when you're alive, well, healthy, could have decades to go. But it's also a really choice opportunity is in the dying. If you can die consciously, if you can die lucidly, maintain that light of awareness through all the stages of death, such that when you're dead, when your mind has collapsed into the substrate consciousness, you're still aware. You're still at rest, you're still loose, you're still relaxed, you're so totally present, fearless. Why? Because you're not identifying with your body and you're not identifying with your mind. If you do, then you'll be dead and you'll be out. But if you learned how to not identify with body, not identify with mind, personal history and all of that, then you can release into the substrate consciousness. You can come to the dead zone, the dying point, and be lucid. And you can remain there up to 3 days. So the body is stopped, everything's stopped. And But still that substrate consciousness is there, and you can remain there lucidly up to 3 days. Could be a matter of just a few minutes. But then something happens naturally, without any effort, without any training at all. It's just in the nature of things, that you don't just hang out there in this kind of this substrate consciousness with the sheer vacuity, sheer absence of appearances. You don't. It kind of melts. It gives way. It breaks. It shatters. And you are dropped into, you descend into, everything here is poetry, nothing's literal, but you descend into this free fall, into what's called the clear light of death. Clear light of death. And that is pristine awareness. It's primordial consciousness. It is the transcendent, that third dimension. And you enter into it naturally, effortlessly, and spontaneously, right after that death moment, right? Now, most people, having had no experience of this whatsoever before, they're just involved in the activities of life and family and hopes and fears and all of the activities, and then they get old and they get sick and then they die, and they die unconsciously, they die non-lucidly, they're dead, they don't know it, and then they're suddenly fall into this open, inconceivable expanse of primordial consciousness, and all they experience is radical disorientation. Does not compute, does not compute, does not compute. And so it's very brief. And they pass right on through. And then it's kind of like it went to total open expanse, and then because there's not the recognition, not the awareness, not the cognizance, the self-knowing of pristine awareness, knowing itself, is not there. It's veiled. Then one passes on through in a matter of seconds or minutes, and then then there's this coagulation again, this individuation again. It comes right back to the substrate consciousness. It opens and then it collapses. And now you have your continuum, but your body's left behind, your mind's left behind, and now you're in this so-called bardo, this intermediate period following death and prior to your next embodiment. And so now your adventure continues. Here's the next chapter. But you had a moment there, an opportunity to realize your ultimate ground. And if one has no training, no experience, no familiarity with it prior to that point, you probably won't get it. And it will open, and then it will contract, and then you'll simply continue on through this intermediate period. But if you've had some experience, and some people have it spontaneously, and this is true everywhere, in the Christian tradition, Hindu, Buddhist, and some with no particular religion at all. It just happens sometimes, mysteriously. The people do have something of a breakthrough into this infinite open expanse. And the words of mystics, I'm sure you know this, you have to know this, there's profound commonality, this intersubjective validation of this deepest level of consciousness. And it can be articulated in multiple frameworks, but it does in fact transcend all conceptual frameworks. For those who've had some experience of that, while they're alive and healthy, and have really cultivated the mind, and released identification with this body, this mind, these possessions, my glass of water, my watch, and so forth, released all of that. Such people may die lucidly, become dead lucidly, and then when the bottom falls out of that, so to speak, and they break through to this clear light of death, the analogy given is of a child crawling onto its mother's lap, and that is a sense of familiarity. Or another analogy given is having a very dear friend and then being parted from that friend for a couple of decades, and then suddenly out of the blue, there's my friend. You pick them out of a crowd. I haven't seen you for decades. That immediate recognition, but you've known the person before, and that immediate recognition, and that is a recognition of your own nature, of your own ground. And if, when you slip into that clear light of death, you can recognize your own nature, your own pristine awareness, that's the direct door to liberation, to freedom. And what's very interesting here, because this could all sound like theology and metaphysics and speculation and so forth, and people have their own perspectives, it's fine. But what's very interesting and very well known now, and it's most evident in the Tibetan tradition, but I think it's not unique to that, is, because I've been following Tibetan Buddhism now for 45 years, and I'm watching closely. About every year or so, we hear one more case, some of my own teachers. So when they die with tremendous serenity, with aplomb, ease, calm. They die, some of them sitting up in meditation, some lying down, whatever they choose. then something remarkable happens. And I witnessed this for the first time in 1992 with these neuroscientists, the same ones we went up the mountain. And we witnessed it just after the event. We missed it only by a matter of a couple of hours. But the evidence was very clear. And that is, if one dies and recognizes the clear light of death when it manifests, which means you realize your ultimate ground. This is the divine. This is the divine within. This is the kingdom of heaven within, by many names. Then what manifests outwardly, and this is very well known, and it's been corroborated many, many times in hospitals, medical doctors. This is not faith. This is clear evidence, and it's inexplicable in terms of modern biomedical paradigm. They have no idea how or why, but it's incontrovertibly true because it's been witnessed many, many times now. What do they see? Is that the yogi stops, the heart stops, the breathing stops. In all likelihood, we're not quite sure of this, but in all likelihood, brain activity entirely stops. And we know that by inference, that if the heart stops, a matter of seconds later, the brain stops. It doesn't continue without blood flow. Well, here the heart stops, the breathing stops, the brain stops, but for hours or even days, with no decomposition of the body. In many cases, the lingering warmth of the heart, at the heart. The complexion looks like a person, very healthy person. There's none of that pastiness, the grayness, and so forth. The skin remains pliable, just like that, like a waking person, or like a healthy person. And the person may remain in that state for days, 2, even 3 weeks, sometimes longer, where that person is right on the cusp. If you ask, is that person alive? The answer is, well, no, there's no signs of life. There's no heartbeat, no EEG, it's brain dead. No, not alive. Is that person dead? Well, dead bodies decompose. They decompose rapidly. If they're in room temperature, in a week you will not want to be within 50 meters of that body, right? Well, not dead, because dead bodies decompose. You're neither, this is non-duality. You're neither alive in any conventional sense of the term, but nor are you dead in any conventional sense of the term. You've gone beyond the parameters of living and dying, beyond the parameters of space and time. And what's manifesting outwardly is just stillness. And then when that time's over, and after sometimes it is, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, this subtle consciousness, this deepest consciousness, this pristine awareness, releases the body. It was there lingering in a way, metaphorically perhaps, in the heart. It disengages. It releases its connection with this body. And when that happens, then the body falls over, and then very commonly it will start to decompose. But for days or weeks until then, you're resting in that clear light of death. And that's witnessed about every year at least once. It's very common, very common. And medical doctors witnessed it, and they just say, it happened, and I don't have a clue how that happened or what's going on. Of course, because they're looking at flesh. How would they know? And you know what makes this utterly fascinating to me? It's, I know a good talk when I hear one. That was a good talk, okay? But frank, talk is cheap. Some people are very articulate and they just know how to talk the talk, you know. And I'm not making any claims about myself at all. But what makes this, you can tell, my sense of this is freshness and enthusiasm and enormous interest. And what sustains that for decades is this can all be tested. This can all be tested. It's hard work, just like getting a PhD in mathematics or neuroscience or becoming a brain surgeon. But people do hard work if they see the value in it. And everything I've said is testable. Now that makes it interesting. And my vision here is, because this has been going on for centuries, is my vision, my passion here, is to let's keep this alive in this current generation. My generation, you're probably about a generation younger than myself. Let's keep it continually vibrant, alive, current, contemporary. But let's do something that's never happened before. And that is, as we are training people in these different stages of meditation, exploring the more superficial, the substrate consciousness in between, and then the ultimate ground, let's invite scientists to the party and let them study as much as they can, you know, and let them meditate, let them taste some of it themselves, but study it so it's all transparent as much as possible. So we have what's the first person perspective is the yogi, him or herself. The second person perspective is that of the instructor, the teacher, the guru, who often has a lot of insight that even the student won't have. Just from years of experience and so forth and so on, the second person. And then the third person perspective So the first person, the yogi, the second person, the guru, the third person are the psychologists, the neuroscientists, who are coming in, studying behavior, giving questionnaires, studying brain correlates, and let's just invite everybody to the party. And not make it sectarian, not just Buddhists. No, we want Vedanta, we want Christian, and so forth. Because these, if what I'm saying here is true, if what I've just said, if that is actually true like the inverse square law of gravity, if it's true like that, in other words, it doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter whether you're religious, not religious. I mean, this is the way it is. If you don't like it, that's okay, but then you're just ignorant. If you think, inverse square law of gravity is not true, that's fine, but you're just ignorant. If it's true like that it doesn't matter on your worldview, all of that business, then my passionate conviction is these are enormously important truths, and they should be public. They shouldn't be just for Buddhists, or Sufis, or Christian contemplatives. If these are true, the world deserves to know about it. And we need to throw off the shackles, truly ideological and methodological shackles. It's a kind of slavery of thinking we're just brains, or we're just bodies, or all there is to reality is what scientists can study. That's almost inconceivably pompous and ridiculous, but many people believe it, and to their loss. To their loss.
So what do you see is the interface between science and spirituality?
Use Occam's razor. And Occam's razor is seeing what are your unnecessary assumptions. What are your unnecessary assumptions? I'll tell you one of them. The mind is nothing more than the brain. Well, that's an assumption. You've never demonstrated that. No one's ever demonstrated. Why not just set that aside for a bit and say, we don't know? We don't know. And so so what you actually know, and neuroscientists know a lot. They know a lot that Buddhists don't know, Christian contemplatives don't know. So keep that. But all the extra, all the baggage, all the reductionism, all the metaphysical assumptions, and of course we find that in religion, but science also has its own truckload of metaphysical assumptions often being presented as scientific fact, and that's really unfortunate. So let's use Occam's razor and set aside all of the uncorroborated assumptions, beliefs, and so forth and so on, and just cut it back to kind of back to the bone and say, what do we really know? What do we really know? And if one yogi knows something, and the scientists say, well, you say that, but we don't know. Of course you don't know. The yogi hasn't been through 15 years of training as a neuroscientist, and the neuroscientist has not been through 15 years of rigorous contemplative training. So of course you don't know. If a neuroscientist tells me, these dendrites are performing this function and that function, I don't know whether they're telling me the truth or not. But not because they're unreliable. I haven't done the hard work, So if we just start out as was stated just a day or two ago, let's start out with a clear awareness of what we don't know, and not pretend to know what we don't. And that goes for everybody. Everybody. And then say, but let's not just remain unknowing. The meaning of life is to awaken to the whole of reality as much as we possibly can, to open our inner resources, to open our hearts, not only intellectual and cognitive, open our hearts. If infinite unconditional compassion is possible, let's know it, And so set the uncorroborated assumptions, metaphysical beliefs, and so forth, set it aside, not like it's rubbish, like it's all false, but just let's be empiricists here. And let's come back and say, what do neuroscientists really know? And keep the fluff out, all this allegory of, neurons know this and this and this. You don't know that, set it aside. No, you don't know that either. Set it aside. What do you know? Oh, okay, this is what you know. And the contemplatives, and bring them together in the spirit of radical open-mindedness with mutual respect, with the assumption, here's an assumption, that no one tradition has all the answers. That's an assumption I'm willing to hold to. Because I don't see any viable candidates. Buddhism is immensely rich, but we have no brain science. And I could give a whole list of other things Buddhism doesn't have. So if we can take that one very transparently, let us assume that let's say Nick is a psychologist, you're a neuroscientist, and I'm a contemplative. Let's come together with the assumption that none of the three of us has all the answers. Let's just kind of assume that until proven otherwise. And then how much can we learn from each other? Through dialogue, through collaborative research. And then when scientists are involved, then they have a platform for when a discovery is made, and they've been a participant, not just studying some yogi's brain. They've been a participant from the ground floor, from the very initial phases. then they could be party to the discoveries. And then the contemplative, the psychologist, the neuroscientist, they could then publish papers jointly with each having his or her own voice and saying, this is what we discovered, and it's now in the public domain. Enjoy.